Welcome back to CX Unplugged, the Customer Data Mini-Series. My name is Susan Ramroop, and I am the Customer Marketing Manager for SAP Customer Data Solutions. Today's episode is all about data privacy and the rights to use your customers' data. As we've been seeing, major GDPR fines are making the news, making brands prioritize data privacy even more now than ever. As a brand, your goal is to essentially put customers in control of their data, earn their trust, and redefine those engagements. But with so many data regulations and things changing all the time, how do we keep track and where do we even begin? Helping me drive today's conversation is Ronald van Loon, founder and CEO of Intelligent World. Welcome, Ronald.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thanks for being here again. So, Ronald, before we dive in, I want to have our usual story time. So I was trying to think of a time when I was affected by data privacy regulations or data breaches. And when I sit here and think about it, I think about all of those times my information was used without my consent and I didn't even realize it. So there was one time I was shopping online. I'd made a purchase with a shoe company. And then the next thing you know, I started receiving emails from a purse company. But it was weird because I didn't make a purchase from this company at all. When I went back to check what I actually consented on, it was specifically to receive promotions from this company. So I decided to do a bit more research. And when I looked into it, I found out that these companies were affiliated. But to me as a consumer, I gave my specific data to that company and not to this third-party company that was started using my information. Has something like this ever happened to you?
Yeah, quite often, and I have quite a funny story, and this is related to GDPR, as you mentioned already in the beginning. If you look, let's say, the way companies are using data now, it's changing a lot in the past 10 years, and it wasn't really that long ago that the regulations have been enforced, and especially, for example, GDPR. And when GDPR was enforced in May 2018. I thought, okay, let's see how companies use my data and if they can comply with the GDPR. So I tested in practice. So I moved from one bank to the other bank, and I asked my bank to give me the insight into all legally required data that they store about me, which is basically the right to access. I requested them to move my data to the new bank, which is the right to portability. And also I asked them whether they could remove it afterwards. So I think I was on 8 phone calls, lots of waiting in the queue, 14 emails, 5 departments I've spoken to, and 3 months further. And the results is basically nothing. No action was taken. No one could really help me because they did not know how to help me. And this was not because of the banks, they didn't want to. They were doing really, I think, their best to be compliant, but the banks faced the complexity of implementing and applying these regulations. And I think some organizations and banks as well still do. Mm-hmm. So if I look under GDPR, I have quite some rights. I have the rights to be informed, to get access, to correct my data, to delete my data, to limit processing, and to move the data to another party if I move from one to the other. And it's something, organizations need to comply with, and that's quite hard as I experienced in the beginning. And I think if I test it now, still some banks are challenging with it. So this is how I remember the real action that I had with GDPR. But as you mentioned, it's every day that you face it.
Yeah. So imagine all that time that went past. Wow.
Yeah, definitely.
So Ronald, I'd love to hear more about what's going on with all of these data regulations in place that we have today. Why don't you go ahead and get that conversation started with our experts backstage?
Yeah, thank you. And I'd really like to dive into that conversation. And I'm happy to introduce 2 domain experts in the data privacy domain that will support us today in our answering the most compelling questions that we have. We have George Greene. He's the go-to-market lead, customer data management, North America at SAP. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, good morning, good night, depending on where you are.
Yeah, definitely. And we have Andrea Rus. He's the Global Vice President, Customer Data, also at SAP. Welcome.
Thank you, Ronald. Hi, George.
Good evening, good morning, good everything. So maybe let me kick off the conversation and start by looking back a little bit. And when we basically started with GDPR in May 2018 in Europe, when this came in place, it was really, I think, one of the biggest milestone in data privacy and in data protection regulations that have occurred the last years. And this changed the scope of business, and they need to clarify and to update their compliance. And this is one of the most one I think the most people will remember, especially the people in Europe. And this was a huge deal because this was federally regulated law, and any company in Europe or doing business inside in Europe were impacted. But since the introduction of the internet in 1990, if we really look back, we started to see data being used in online advertising, then in social media, then started in all different kind of applications. We have smartphones, we have some wearables. Now we have artificial intelligence really taking off. So it's used more and more and more. And we see this happening in the last 20 years, and there will be more in the coming 20 years. And these technologies, they didn't exist in the past at this scale. So now the regulatory authorities had to reimagine basically how to implement protection, how to implement these privacy laws into the new technological world that's changing so rapidly. So today we are seeing lots of laws and regulations that account for the existing technologies, but they're also flexible to account for the future technologies. But the main question, what Susan was already mentioning, where did it all start? So Andrea, maybe can you tell us a little bit more about the history of our regulations, what has been happening, and how did it all started?
Sure, thank you, Ronald. Indeed, privacy regulations have evolved quite a lot over the last years. It started off really, you mentioned the start of the internet in 1990. The first EU directive on data protection happened in 1995. So this was clearly high in the agenda since now over 20 years. And this was followed by the Safe Harbor Agreement in 2005. Safe Harbor really being regulating the data exchanges, personal data exchanges in between the European Union and the United States. This remained into effect for approximately 15 years. It was invalidated in 2015. Then you might remember the brief introduction of the Privacy Shield, replacing Safe Harbor in between the US and the European Union. And of course, we had the GDPR coming up through General Data Protection Regulation, which was adopted in 2016, and then of course came into effect in May 2018. And from there, we've seen a number of other countries leveraging the GDPR framework, so to create their own versions or their own flavors of data privacy regulations. Just to mention a few, in the last years, we've seen the launch of LGPD in Brazil, of CCPA in California. We've seen the POPIA Act, so that's the Protection of Personal Information Act in South Africa, various PDPA agreements such as the one in Singapore and other Asian countries, and so on and so forth. And what's interesting to note, as you pointed out, is that all of the recent regulations really focus on empowering the citizen and the consumer to own his or her personal data and decide what, when, to whom, and for how long to share that personal information for.
Yeah, it's a great overview, I think. And George, can you share your view on this history, but then more from a data residency perspective?
Yeah, I was going to say, just adding to what Andrea said. I mean, there are data residency requirements in a number of different countries. Data residency simply means that the data must be stored in the country of origin, and lots of countries have these rules. Think about China, Australia, Russia, especially. And this has caused a lot of issues for both hyperscalers and SaaS software providers. They've had to open up multiple data centers globally. And just as a case in point, LinkedIn has been unable to do any business in Russia since 2016. They've been shut down because of these data residency requirements. So this is a serious issue that must be addressed. SAP, for example, has multiple data centers globally to address this very issue.
Yeah, and you mentioned already, it's quite challenging even for these type of large organizations which are totally data focused. So we see that these organizations are really challenged by these new laws, by these new regulations. So for example, if we have consumer requests, to delete or to port their personal data next to this data residency as well to a competitor, they must comply, and that's quite hard. And as a result, I think they have to search through that individual personal data across all the different touch points, and that's quite a challenge. And also, if they have to port the data to a competitor, I see many organizations not doing it. So we see quite some challenges happening right now, and organizations still are facing these type of challenges. And I think this is just a small example from everything what's going on. So if we look to a more advanced viewpoint of organizations' challenges with privacy and with security, for example, they would be providing transparency and data control, which Andrea was mentioning, and which is some kind of new landscape for organizations to traverse when interacting with their customers. They were not used to it, and sometimes they are not acquainted to it right now either. And organizations, they can face fines and penalties within GDPRs, for example, where you have, if you're not compliant, it can go even up to 20 million or 4% of your global turnover, which can be substantial. And needless, I think, to say is that only I'm hitting this just top of this iceberg, I think, with these examples and that we gave when it comes to the complexities of data privacy and regulations and the challenges within organizations. So Andrea, can you describe in much more further detail all kinds of challenges that you see at your organizations you're working with and what they are experiencing?
Sure. Well, I think you hit it on the nail, whereby for years, companies really have been amassing gigabytes of information on all of their customers and consumers, very often without asking or requiring or recording the explicit consents of their users or consumers or customers. And this poses a challenge today. So it poses, first of all, a challenge of which data points do I have access to, whether I can use them, in which context I can use them, do I have the right consent for using it, do I have the right purpose for leveraging this kind of data in new contexts. So clearly this is posing major challenges to the organizations. Now, luckily enough, there has been a whole industry now being spun off from these data privacy requirements. So we're seeing data privacy officers being put in place in most of the organizations. And these are in turn putting in place the processes, the tools, the software, and most importantly, the governance. So to ensure compliance towards the existing privacy data regulations, but most importantly, on creating a value-based, trust-based relationship with the end consumer or end customer. But clearly, this is not an easy task, and it's not done overnight. That's why we haven't seen as yet any CCPA fines or any LGPD fines in Brazil, because it has just been introduced. But on the flip side, since 2018, so since May 2018, when GDPR was introduced, we have seen a number of high-profile fines, as well as more national fines being imposed by GDPR. And here, George, maybe you can refresh our mind with regards to...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Amazon just got fined 746 million euros, WhatsApp at 225 million euros, and Google at 57 million euros. So they've started to enforce this in earnest. And if you think about that, just cumulatively, just those three fines, you're talking about $1 billion. So this is going to give notice to a lot of the smaller companies that they're also subject to these fines and they better comply. CCPA, on the other hand, they haven't actually issued any fines yet, but they have issued notices of violations. Now, just to put that in perspective, 75% of businesses who received these notices of violations were compliant within 30 days. The other 25% are either in grace periods or are being actively investigated. So this enforcement is starting now, and companies need to make sure that they're able to comply with these regulations.
Yeah, I think you nicely summarize it. On one end, it's the fines, but I think more important, what Andrea was mentioning, it's the trust of the customers.
So if you heard that noise, and if you've been watching our last few episodes, you'll know that it's time for quick trivia. So I'm going to ask you 3 really quick questions, and we'll see who knows what. Okay, so first question. What does GDPR stand for? Ronald?
This time I'm the fastest. Last time I forgot, but now I'm the fastest. GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation, and it started in May 2018. And I think it's designed for companies who process personal data within Europe, whether you are a company operating in Europe or you established outside of Europe and you deliver services to European people, to European consumers, or process data in Europe. And under GDPR, you have the right to be, as mentioned already, to be informed, to get access, to correct your data, to delete the data, to limit the processing, and also port your data to other companies if you move from one to the other.
You are correct.
Thank you. 1 point.
Question number 2. What is data residency?
That's me.
George.
All right, that's an easy one. I just talked about this. So data residency requirement, it's all about making sure the data, the country of origination, the data must stay in that country. So data cannot be exported from that country. It must reside in that particular country.
Okay, yes. Okay, last question. This one's a bit tricky. Name 3 countries with strict data residency laws.
Got it.
Is there any for it?
Well, there's different countries, but just to name a few: Russia, China, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Australia.
Oh, okay. So you named 3. Great job, guys. Round of applause for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that fun intermission. Back to you, Ronald.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for the great trivia questions. But I'm also curious, how can SAP help organizations with being compliant and managing data privacy? George, Andrea, maybe you can elaborate on this?
Sure, I can take this one. So there's a number of different ways in which you can look at these regulations, right? You got the carrot and the stick, and the stick is obviously the threat of fines, but there's also a carrot. And when you think about it, these regulations provide a framework for companies to create this trusted relationship with their customers. And, they do have this opportunity to really look at their customer relationship, look at how customers trust them, and look at how they actually treat customer privacy. Obviously, we have software that addresses this. We have enterprise consent and preference management software that enables companies to really adhere to those regulations. But most importantly, when you think about the framework of creating this trusted customer relationship, I just read a recent Forbes article, and it stated that 63% of consumers would lean their business towards companies that respect their privacy as a key differentiator. So companies understand this. The reason these laws originated in the first place was because of citizens' concern with invasion of their privacy. And they're now taking action against that. But it does give companies the opportunity to create this trusted relationship, and that can be a differentiator in the marketplace. And we have a customer, Franklin Covey, and Blaine Carter, who's the CISO of Franklin Covey, put it very well. He said, "Don't chase the most recent compliance regulations. You'll never be able to stay ahead of it, but do what's best for the customer, and the regulations will follow along." If you just treat your customers with respect their privacy, you can adhere to all of these various global regulations. And of course, SAP software can help you get there as well. Another thing that SAP does is we put data privacy at the center of everything that we do. We call this privacy by design. And for example, our customer data platform, which has been released about a year now, we will not process any data in that platform without customer consent. And we also have this concept of processing purpose, whereby customer data will not be sent to any downstream applications without specific purpose attached to that data. So we're putting this front and center. We've seen that our customers have really embraced the concept of customer privacy. And I think overall, these regulations have really become part and parcel with everything we do as we go to market.
Yeah, nicely described. And maybe, Andrea, you can add.
Sure. I think, George, you said it all. The main reason for which our customers trust SAP in supporting them in their road to compliancy to GDPR and the other privacy regulations is that we really have a very strong expertise in all of the front-end consent management capabilities, and making sure that we manage not only the consent, but also the purpose, as you mentioned earlier. And here we are one of the only organizations in the world that are able to bring together both all of the complexities behind enterprise resource planning that SAP is known for, all of the great capabilities brought together by our customer experience line of business, and most importantly, so to power the best personalized experiences, clearly you need to rely on identity, consented identity data, and being able to manage this data with the right purpose. And this is what we bring as a SaaS solution available today, off the shelf, empowering over 500 customers globally.
Nice. And I think it's really the foundation of every organization, a trusted relationship with your client. Without it, I don't think even you have a business. So it's the core for every organization. So as we enter the discussion, I'd like to wrap this by saying that modern consumers, they are exactly confident in a way that organizations are handling and collecting the data and use that data, and they trust the companies they work with. So they are concerned to do for their privacy, they are concerned for the security, and they want to be in control of how that data is being used. And it's up to the organizations basically to comply with the existing and the upcoming privacy laws, with the regulations, and build that trust. Maybe the regulations are not the most important part even, it's building this trust. And also companies need to prepare for a future that's going to change alongside with this rapid pace of technology changes, as all these new and larger data volumes are going to require much more enhanced data protection and governance. And this is a foundation for running your business. But with the right technology platform, with the right partnerships, with companies can, on one hand, protect their customer and their employee data as well as their reputation, while remaining compliant with any current and any future law and any future regulations. And lastly, I think future regulations are going to be enacted in all different kind of regions, in all different kind of countries, what we see now across the globe. And companies, they have to be ready to be compliant with these laws, and they can protect their customers and their customer data and avoid any potential penalties, but also, even more importantly, as mentioned already before, build customer trust and engagement. And data privacy and data security can be challenging areas, as we have discussed, to navigate. But I think with enterprises operating and data processing data in all the different countries at the same time, if you manage it well, you are in a good position. But you have to organize it well, as it's the foundation for your organization. So thanks for this great conversation today, everyone. And it was, I think, really valuable. Susan, can you leave us with some final thoughts?
Yeah, so thank you guys all again for that great conversation. And thank you all for joining today's session. Be sure to join us in a couple of weeks for our next episode, where we actually show you how you can use our solutions to integrate that consent management platform in order to respect your customers and gain their trust. And as always, if you'd like to be on the show or have a pressing topic and want to hear more about it, be sure to send us an email at CXUnplugged@sap.com. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.